My husband Tyrell died 5 years ago. Since that dreadful Tuesday, I have sent his mother exactly $250 every single month to pay off a medical debt she claimed he left behind. That is $15,000 of my hard-earned money handed over in cash envelopes while I drove a rusted Honda and clipped coupons to survive. I thought I was honoring his memory. I thought I was keeping a promise to the man I loved. I thought I was helping family. Then yesterday, my neighbor Mrs. Higgins pulled me aside and showed me a video from her Ring security camera. "Stop sending money, Jada," she whispered, her hands shaking as she held out her phone. "You need to see this." What I saw on that cracked screen did not just break my heart. It unleashed a war. Before I tell you what was on that tape, let me know in the comments if you have ever supported family members who secretly despised you. Please like and subscribe as I share how I turned the tables on the people who thought they could bleed me dry. The air conditioning in my 2012 Honda Accord had given up 3 summers ago. By the time I pulled up to the familiar driveway for the 4th of July barbecue, my silk blouse was sticking to my back and my hair was frizzing in the relentless Georgia humidity. I parked on the street, careful not to block the row of shiny SUVs and the brand-new leased BMW sitting proudly in the driveway. This house, the one Tyrell had grown up in, used to look modest. It used to have peeling paint and overgrown hedges. Now fresh landscaping lined the walkway with perfectly trimmed boxwoods, and a new slate roof glistened under the sun. It seemed my monthly contributions were doing more than just buying medicine. I took a deep breath, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. I looked like exactly what they thought I was, a struggling widow working a low-level job at the hospital archives. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the white envelope. Inside were $20 bills I had withdrawn from the ATM that morning. My stomach churned with a familiar mix of dread and obligation. I walked up the driveway, the smell of charcoal and expensive marinade filling the air. Before I could even reach the porch steps, the front door opened. It was Gavin, my sister-in-law, Ebony's husband. He stepped out onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind him, as if to protect the cool air-conditioned sanctuary inside from my presence. He was wearing a pastel polo shirt that looked brand new, the collar popped and holding a craft beer in a frosty glass. He did not smile. He did not say Happy 4th. He just stood at the top of the stairs, acting as the gatekeeper to a family I was legally supposed to be part of. He looked down at me, his blue eyes scanning my worn-out sandals with a look that hovered somewhere between pity and disgust. "You are late, Jada," he said, checking a heavy gold watch on his wrist. "Mom has been waiting for her medication money since the 1st of the month. You know the pharmacy does not hold prescriptions forever." I tried to step around him, forcing a polite smile. "I am sorry, Gavin," I said, clutching the envelope tighter. "My shift ran late yesterday. I just wanted to say hello to Vernon and see if her back pain was any better. I heard she was having a flare-up." Gavin sidestepped, blocking my path with his shoulder. He took a sip of his beer, not breaking eye contact. "The adults are having a serious conversation inside," he said, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper that made my skin crawl. "We have some important investors over, talking about the new business ventures. You know how it is. We do not want to bore you with financial talk. Just give me the envelope and go grab a plate from the kids' table in the yard." The kids' table. I was a 35-year-old woman. I was a widow. I was the one paying their bills, and I was being banished to the plastic folding table near the garbage cans like a naughty child. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I swallowed the retort that was sitting on the tip of my tongue. I handed him the envelope. He snatched it from my hand without a thank you, weighing it in his palm, as if checking to make sure I had not shorted them $1. "Make yourself a plate," he said, already turning back to the door. "But maybe stay out back. We want to keep the vibe inside professional." I walked around the side of the house to the backyard. The heat was suffocating. The grass was perfectly manicured, a stark contrast to the weed-infested yard this house had when Tyrell was alive. While a dozen children chased each other with sparklers and screamed in delight, I sat on a cracked plastic chair that wobbled on the uneven ground. On the paper plates out here there were burnt hot dogs, generic potato chips, and watered-down fruit punch. But through the large sliding glass door, I could see into the dining room. It was like looking into a different world. There was Vernon, my mother-in-law. She was sitting at the head of the table looking radiant. For a woman who claimed she needed 3 different specialists for debilitating spinal issues, she looked remarkably upright. She was laughing, throwing her head back, holding a glass of white wine that caught the light of the chandelier. And on the table, it wasn't hot dogs. It was a feast. Huge red lobsters, platters of jumbo shrimp, and thick cuts of steak. I sat there chewing on a cold hot dog bun, watching my money disappear into their stomachs. I watched Gavin slap Tyrell's empty seat, laughing at a joke looking entirely too comfortable in the house my husband had worked himself to the bone to help maintain. Suddenly, the sliding door opened. I straightened up, expecting an invitation, or perhaps just a glass of water. Instead, Ebony stepped out. She fanned herself with a napkin, acting as if the humidity of the common world was too much for her delicate constitution. She walked over to where I sat, her heels clicking on the patio pavers. She was holding the envelope Gavin had just given her. She did not even look me in the eye. She just flicked the corner of the envelope with a manicured nail that probably cost $50 to paint. "Is this it?" she asked, her voice dripping with disappointment. I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans, trying to maintain my dignity in front of the staring children. "It is 250 ebony," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Just like every month. That is what we agreed on." "That is what I can afford." She rolled her eyes, a gesture she had perfected since we were in high school. "Inflation." "Jada," she sighed. "Do you know how much Mom's specialists cost now? This barely covers the copay. It is embarrassing, really. Maybe if you got a real job instead of filing papers in that dusty basement at the hospital, you could actually help this family. A real job." The insult landed like a physical blow. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to reach into my purse, pull out my phone, and log into my banking app. I wanted to shove the screen in her face and show her that, as a senior data analyst for the largest healthcare network in the state, I made more in a single quarterly bonus check than she and Gavin made in a year combined. I wanted to tell her that I drove a rusted Honda because I was stacking cash and investing in diversified portfolios, not leasing liabilities to impress neighbors. I wanted to scream that the only reason I played this role, the role of the struggling, dim-witted widow, was because I was testing them. But I did not. Because 5 years ago, as machines beeped and Tyrell took his ragged last breaths, he had grabbed my hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were desperate. "Take care of them, Jada," he had whispered. "They are bad with money, they are selfish, but they are my blood. Please promise me you will help them." That promise was a chain around my neck, choking me every single day. I looked at Ebony, at the expensive weave in her hair, at the diamond studs in her ears, and then down at my own scuffed shoes. "I am doing my best," I said quietly, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "Tell Vernon I said hello." I picked up my purse. I did not wait for a response. I did not say goodbye to the children. I turned around and walked back down the driveway, leaving the smell of expensive seafood and the sound of their mockery behind me. I climbed into my hot car, the leather seat burning my legs. As I drove away, I wiped a single tear of frustration from my cheek. I told myself I was being the bigger person. I told myself I was honoring Tyrell. I had no idea that back at the house, Gavin was already laughing, raising a toast to the fool who paid for their feast. And I certainly didn't know that this was the last time I would ever let them see me cry. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys to my Honda. The humidity was oppressive, but it was the humiliation that made it hard to breathe. I just wanted to get home to hug my son Leo and wash the smell of charcoal and rejection off my skin. I had just put the car in reverse. when I saw a hand wave frantically from the other side of the fence. It was Mrs. Higgins. She was 72 years old and spent most of her days tending to her prize-winning hydrangeas, which gave her a perfect vantage point of everything that happened on our street. Usually, she would just wave a polite hello, but today her expression was urgent. Her eyes were wide behind her thick glasses, and she was gesturing for me to kill the engine. I rolled down the window expecting her to ask about the noise, or maybe complain about Gavin parking his truck on the curb again. But she did not say a word at first. She just reached through the open window and gripped my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Her skin felt dry like paper, but her hands were warm. "Jada, honey, you need to get out of the car," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. I frowned, confused by the intensity in her eyes. "Mrs. Higgins, I really should get going. Leo is waiting for me, and I do not think I can handle any more conversation today." She shook her head firmly, cutting me off. "No, you do not understand. You need to see this, right now. Come to my porch. It is about what happened after you walked away." Something in the pit of my stomach turned over. It was that instinct you get right before a car crash, the split-second realization that impact is inevitable. I turned off the ignition and stepped out into the sweltering heat. I followed her up the wooden steps of her porch, which was cluttered with ceramic gnomes and wind chimes. She did not offer me iced tea like she usually did. Instead, she pulled out her smartphone. The screen was cracked at the top corner, but the image was crystal clear. It was the live feed from her Ring doorbell camera, which was angled perfectly towards the side yard of my mother-in-law's house. I watched the timestamp on the video. It was from 5 minutes ago. The video showed me walking away, my head down, shoulders slumped. I looked defeated. I looked exactly like the pathetic widow they wanted me to be. As soon as my car disappeared from the frame, the audio picked up laughter. It was not joyful laughter. It was the raucous, ugly sound of people who had just gotten away with something. I leaned in closer to the phone screen. In the video, Gavin was holding the envelope I had just handed him. He was not bringing it inside to Vernon. He was tearing it open right there on the patio. He pulled out the cash and fanned it out like he was in a rap video. "Look at this," he sneered, his voice clear as day through the camera's microphone. 250, like clockwork. I honestly did not think she would pay up this month after Ebony made that comment about her shoes. Ebony walked into the frame holding a glass of champagne. She took the cash from Gavin and stuffed it into her bra. "She is such a cash cow." Ebony laughed. "A stupid, reliable cash cow. 5 years, Gavin. 5 years she has been paying us $15,000 total for a medical debt that does not even exist. I swear she's the dumbest smart person I know. She works at a hospital, but she never thinks to check the billing records." I felt the blood drain from my face. My knees went weak, and I had to grab the porch railing to steady myself. Mrs. Higgins put a hand on my back, but I could not look away. The video continued. Gavin took a sip of his beer and leaned back against the patio railing. "It is better than that," he said. "Not only is she giving us cash, she is still paying the insurance on this house. She thinks she is protecting Tyrell's legacy. She has no idea she is paying premiums on a property that does not even belong to her anymore. When we sell this place next month and move to Florida, she is going to be the one shocked when the bank tells her she has zero equity." I stopped breathing. Sell the house. Move to Florida. Tyrell's house. The house he had bought with his overtime pay. The house he had restored with his own hands. They had stolen the title. They were planning to sell it out from under me and vanish. But the worst part was yet to come. In the video, the sliding glass door opened again. My mother-in-law Vernon stepped out. The woman who claimed she needed a walker to get from the bedroom to the bathroom. The woman who told me last week that her spinal stenosis was so bad she could barely hold a spoon. On the screen, Vernon did not have her walker. She was not hunched over. She was holding a skewer of grilled shrimp in one hand and a wine glass in the other. Ebony clapped her hands. "Mama, look, Jada paid up. We are good for the deposit on the Tesla. Vernon threw her head back and laughed. It was a deep, throaty cackle that made my skin crawl. Bless her heart, Vernon said. She really thinks she is a martyr. She thinks she is suffering for Tyrell. Well, Tyrell is dead, but he is still making money for his mama. That is a good son. Then she did something that shattered whatever jagged pieces of my heart were left. Vernon the invalid, the fragile old woman, started to dance. She shimmied her hips, shaking her shoulders, doing a perfect salsa step across the patio, while Gavin and Ebony clapped. She moved with the agility of a woman 20 years younger. There was no pain, there was no disability, there was only fraud. Pure, calculated, malicious fraud. The video ended. The screen went black. Mrs. Higgins put the phone down on the small wicker table. She looked at me expecting tears. She expected the young widow to break down and sob. She reached for a box of tissues she kept on the table. "I am so sorry, baby," she said softly. "They are monsters. I knew something was wrong when I saw her gardening last Tuesday without her cane, but I never imagined this. You go ahead and cry. Let it out." But the tears did not come. I stood there staring at the blank phone screen. A strange sensation washed over me. It started at the base of my neck and spread down to my fingertips. It was cold. Ice cold. The suffocation I had felt earlier vanished. The humidity did not bother me anymore. The confusion was gone. In its place was a crystalline clarity. For 5 years I had viewed the world through the lens of grief. I had looked at Vernon and seen the woman who gave birth to my husband. I had looked at Gavin and Ebony and seen the siblings Tyrell had tried to protect. My emotions had been the variable that corrupted the data. I had been operating on bad input. But now I had the raw data. I had the facts. I am a senior data analyst. My job is not just filing papers. My job is to look at millions of lines of code, to find patterns, to spot anomalies, to identify where resources are being bled, and to stop the hemorrhage. I find the cancer in the system, and I cut it out. I realized in that moment that my life was just another spreadsheet, and I had just found the error. I looked up at Mrs. Higgins. My face was dry, my pulse was slow and steady. "Can you send that video to my email?" I asked. My voice sounded different even to my own ears. It was lower, deeper. It lacked the tremor of the victim. Mrs. Higgins blinked, surprised by my calmness. "Of course, honey. But what are you going to do? Are you going to confront them? Are you going to go back over there and scream at them?" I looked over the fence at the roof of the house my husband built. I could still hear the faint sound of music playing from their backyard. They were celebrating. They were toasting to their cleverness, thinking the game was over. They had no idea the game had just begun. "No," I said, smoothing down my skirt. "I am not going to scream. Screaming is for people who have no power. I am going to go home. I am going to make dinner for my son. And then, I am going to open my laptop." I walked back to my car. I did not slam the door. I started the engine and drove away slowly, observing the speed limit. As I turned the corner, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. I saw the house not as a home, but as an asset. I saw them not as family, but as liabilities. They wanted a cash cow. They had forgotten that when you push an animal into a corner, eventually it stops giving milk and starts using its horns. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I had not used in years. It was a private investigator I used to contract with for background checks at the hospital. "Hey Marcus," I said when he picked up. "It is Jada. I have a job for you. I need you to pull the property records for 42 Oak Street. And Marcus, I need you to dig deep. I want to know every credit card, every loan, every signature associated with the name Tyrell Jackson for the past 5 years." I hung up the phone. A small, cold smile touched my lips. The grieving widow died on Mrs. Higgins' porch. The woman driving the car was someone they had never met before, and by the time I was done with them, they would wish they had just settled for the cheap medication. The silence in my living room was usually a comfort, but tonight it felt heavy with the weight of unseen ghosts. I checked on Leo one last time. He was sound asleep, clutching the stuffed bear Tyrell had bought him just weeks before the accident. I closed his bedroom door softly and walked to the kitchen table not to make tea, but to set up my command center. I pulled my laptop out of my bag. To my in-laws, I was just Jada, the receptionist who struggled to pay bills. They did not know that this laptop contained a direct encrypted VPN tunnel to one of the largest healthcare databases in the country. They did not know that the woman they mocked for driving a Honda was responsible for auditing millions of dollars in medical claims every quarter. I sat down and cracked my knuckles. It was time to go to work. The screen illuminated my face with a harsh blue light as I bypassed the standard login and accessed the administrative archives. My fingers flew across the keyboard. For 5 years, I had avoided looking at Tyrell's file. The grief had been too raw, and seeing his name next to the word deceased was a pain I had not been ready to face. But tonight, the anger burning in my chest was stronger than the grief. I typed in his social security number. The system buffered for a moment before pulling up the records from Mercy General Hospital dated 5 years ago. I held my breath as I clicked on the billing tab. Vernon had told me the insurance had denied the claim. She had wept at my kitchen table holding a fake invoice, saying they owed $15,000 for the emergency surgery that failed to save him. She said she had taken out a predatory loan to pay it so Tyrell would not be buried with debt. I scrolled down to the bottom line. My heart hammered against my ribs. Account balance 0. I blinked and leaned closer. I expanded the payment history. There it was in black and white. Blue Cross, Blue Shield had paid the entire bill in full 3 weeks after his death. There was no outstanding balance. There was no loan. There was no debt. Every single envelope of cash I had handed over for the last 60 months had gone straight into their pockets. I felt a wave of nausea. I remembered the nights I ate instant noodles so I could save that money. I remembered wearing shoes with holes in the soles so Vernon wouldn't stress about the debt. They had looked me in the eye at his funeral while they were lowering his casket and lied to me. But I did not stop there. The data analyst in me knew that if there was one lie, there were always more. Anomalies never appear in isolation. I minimized the hospital window and opened my secure email. Marcus, the private investigator I had called from the car, was fast. He had already sent a preliminary credit report. The subject line simply read, "Call me." I picked up my phone and dialed. Marcus answered on the first ring. "Jada," he said, his voice low and serious. "You are not going to like this." "Just tell me, Marcus." I said, my voice steady. "How bad is it?" "It is not just the medical bills," Marcus said. "I ran a full credit sweep on Tyrell's social security number. Usually when a person dies, the credit bureaus lock the file. But someone who had all his personal information managed to bypass the freeze. Jada, there are 3 active credit cards in Tyrell's name." I gripped the phone tighter. "Active Tyrell has been dead for 5 years. Active and maxed out," Marcus confirmed. "There is an American Express opened 2 months after the funeral. A Visa Platinum opened a year later. And Jada, there is a business loan. $50,000 for something called Gavin's Ventures LLC. It is co-signed by Tyrell Jackson." The room spun. Gavin, my brother-in-law, the man who had sneered at me on the porch today. He had used my dead husband's name, his credit, his reputation to fund his failed startup. They weren't just stealing my money. They were keeping Tyrell alive on paper like a zombie to feed off his credit score. This was not just a family dispute anymore. This was federal crime. This was identity theft. This was fraud. I looked at the dates on the report Marcus had sent. The most recent charge on the Visa card was from yesterday. $400 at a liquor store. That explained the champagne. That explained the expensive seafood. They were partying on my husband's grave, using credit cards issued in his name. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall. A strange calm settled over me. It was the calm of a soldier who finally sees the enemy clearly. For years, I had been fighting a fog of guilt, thinking I wasn't doing enough. But now the fog was gone. I looked at the family photo on the mantel. Me, Leo, and Tyrell. They thought I was weak. They thought I was stupid. They thought they could use me until I was dry and then discard me. I turned back to my laptop. I did not close the tabs. I printed everything. The zero-balance medical bill, the credit report showing the fraudulent loans, the dates, the amounts, the signatures that looked painfully like Tyrell's but had a slight hesitation in the loop of the J. I looked at the stack of papers warm from the printer. This was my ammunition, but I was not going to fire it yet. If I confronted them now, they would deny it. They would claim it was a mistake. They would gaslight me. No. I needed to trap them. I needed them to admit it. I needed to let them think they were winning so they would get careless. I picked up my phone and composed a text to Vernon. My hands did not shake. I typed, "I am sorry about today, Mom. I will try to find extra money for next month. I know how important Tyrell's debt is." I hit send. It was the last lie I would ever tell them. But it was a necessary one. I needed them to feel safe. I needed Gavin to feel arrogant. Because when I finally pulled the rug out from under them, I wanted to make sure they had nowhere to land but a prison cell. I turned off the lights in the living room, but I did not go to sleep. I sat in the dark watching the streetlights cast long shadows across the floor, planning my next move. The grieving widow was gone. The auditor had arrived, and the audit was going to be brutal. The next evening I pulled into the driveway of the house on Oak Street, but this time I did not park on the street. I pulled my rusted Honda right up to the garage door. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, breathing in the scent of stale air conditioning and impending war. I was not wearing my silk blouse or my tailored slacks. I was wearing an old gray t-shirt with a small hole in the collar and jeans that had seen better days. I had rubbed off my makeup, leaving my face pale and tired. I needed to look like a woman on the edge of breaking because that is exactly what predators like to see. It excites them. I tapped the voice memo app on my phone and slipped it into my front pocket, making sure the microphone was facing out. Then I walked to the front door. I did not knock. I used the key Tyrell had given me 6 years ago, the key they had tried to demand back a dozen times. When I stepped into the living room, the scene was almost comical. Vernon was sprawled on the recliner watching a shopping channel surrounded by pillows. Ebony was on the sofa scrolling through her phone while Gavin paced the floor talking loudly on a call about some investment opportunity that was guaranteed to fail. The room went silent when they saw me. Gavin ended his call abruptly. "Well, look who decided to show up," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Did you bring the rest of the cash, or are you just here to beg for leftovers?" I clasped my hands together in front of me, slumping my shoulders. I tried to make myself look smaller. "I am sorry to intrude," I said, keeping my voice trembling and low. "But we need to talk. It is about the money." Vernon muted the television. Her eyes narrowed instantly, losing the glassy look of boredom and sharpening into flint. "What about the money, Jada? Do not tell me you are short again. My blood pressure cannot handle stress. You know what the doctor said." I took a deep breath, forcing a tear to pool in my eye. "It is not just short, Vernon. I can't pay this month. The hospital cut my hours. They are downsizing the archive department. I barely have enough for rent and food for Leo. I was hoping just for this month we could pause the payments, just until I find a second job." The explosion was instantaneous. It was as if I had tossed a grenade into the room. "You what?" Vernon shrieked. She sat up so fast the pillows tumbled to the floor. "You selfish, ungrateful girl, you want to kill me. Is that it? You want Tyrell's mother to die in pain because you are too lazy to work harder." Then came the performance. Vernon grabbed her chest, clutching the fabric of her blouse. She let out a strangled gasp and slumped back into the chair, kicking her legs out. My heart, she wailed, looking up at the ceiling. Oh, sweet Jesus, it is happening. The stress is too much. My heart is giving out. Ebony jumped up, dropping her phone. Look what you did! She screamed, pointing a manicured finger at my face. You are giving her a heart attack. Are you happy now? I stood there watching them. My face showed panic, but my mind was recording every detail. I noted that Vernon's skin was not pale, she was not sweating, her breathing was rhythmic despite her wailing. It was a performance worthy of a daytime soap opera, but terrible for a medical diagnosis. Gavin slammed his hand onto the dining table, making a vase rattle. That is enough, he roared. He marched over to me, towering over my frame, using his height to intimidate. Listen to me, Jada. We are not playing games here. You think you can just walk in here and cut off my mother's lifeline? I sniffled, wiping my nose with the back of my hand. Gavin. Please, I have no money. I checked my bank account this morning, and it is empty. I do not care. Gavin spat. You have a legal obligation. Tyrell made a verbal contract to take care of his mother, and you inherited his debts. If you do not put $250 in my hand by tomorrow morning, I am going to call the police. The police? I asked, widening my eyes. Yes, the police. Gavin set his face inches from mine. And then I am going to call a lawyer. In the state of Georgia, abandonment of a dependent elderly person is a crime, Jada. It is called elder abuse. I will have you thrown in jail for negligence. And when you are in a cell, guess who gets custody of Leo? We do. I felt a cold spike of rage in my gut at the mention of my son, but I pushed it down. This was the threat I needed. They were threatening to frame me for a crime to extort money. I needed them to go one step further. I needed them to demand something specific. I do not have cash, I sobbed, letting the tears fall freely now. Please do not take Leo. I will do anything. Ebony walked over, her eyes gleaming with opportunity. She looked me up and down, and then she looked out the window at my car parked in the driveway. You do not have cash, Ebony said, her voice silky and dangerous. But you have assets, Jada. What assets? I asked. Ebony walked to the sideboard and grabbed a notepad and a pen. She scribbled something furiously. Your car, she said. That Honda. It is a piece of junk, but the parts are worth something. And I know a guy who buys scrap. My car, I gasped. But I need that to get to work. How will I take Leo to school? Not our problem. Vernon groaned from the chair, miraculously recovering enough to negotiate. You should have thought about that before you decided to stop paying your debts. Sign the car over to us as collateral. We will hold the title. If you do not pay us double next month, $500, we keep the car. Ebony shoved the notepad into my hands. It was a crude contract written in blue ink. I, Jada Jackson, hereby pledge my 2012 Honda Accord to Gavin and Ebony Miller as security for unpaid debts to Vernon Jackson. If payment is not made by August 1st, title transfers immediately. This was it. This was extortion. They were forcing me to sign over property under duress based on a fraudulent debt. It was beautiful. I held the pen, my hand trembling violently. I cannot believe you are doing this, I whispered. Tyrell would never want this. Don't you speak his name? Gavin hissed. Sign the paper, Jada. Or I call the cops right now and tell them you pushed Mom. I put the pen to the paper. I let out a jagged breath. I signed my name. But I did not sign it Jada Jackson with the sweeping loops I use on my checks and legal documents. I signed it with a cramped, jagged scrawl that looked nothing like my official signature. I added a tiny, barely visible dot after the last name. It was a signal I used in data verification. A marker for a corrupted file. A marker for a document signed under duress. There, I said, dropping the pen. I signed it. Please, just let me go. Ebony snatched the paper and smirked, checking the signature. She did not notice the difference. She was too blinded by greed. Good, she said. Now, get out. And do not come back without our money. I backed out of the room looking at Vernon, who was now sitting up reaching for her glass of wine, her heart attack apparently cured by the acquisition of a 10-year-old sedan. I walked out to my car. My legs felt heavy but my mind was light. I sat in the driver's seat and locked the doors. I pulled the phone from my pocket and stopped the recording. I played back the last minute. Gavin's threat to frame me. Vernon's miraculous recovery, the demand for the car, I had them. I had them on tape committing extortion, fraud, and blackmail. I started the car and backed out of the driveway. As I drove down the street, the tears on my face dried up. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The tired, scared woman was gone. In her place was a hunter who had just set the perfect snare. They wanted my car. They wanted my money. They wanted my son. They were about to find out that they had just signed a contract with the devil, and I was coming to collect their souls. I reached for my phone and dialed my lawyer. It was time to start phase 2. It was time to introduce them to the real Jada. The morning sun was blinding as I walked up the stone steps of the Fulton County Records Office. I had called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. My supervisor was worried, but I told her I had a family emergency. She had no idea how true that was. I was not there to grieve. I was there to excavate the truth. The air inside the building smelled of dust and bureaucracy. I took a ticket and waited. I needed to see the physical deed to the house on Oak Street. Online records were good, but they did not show the nuances of ink on paper. They did not show the pressure of a pen or the hesitation in a signature. When the clerk finally handed me the file, I took it to a quiet corner table. My hands were gloved not for warmth, but because I did not want to leave my fingerprints on the evidence. I opened the folder. The first document was the original warranty deed from 10 years ago. I smiled sadly, seeing Tyrell's bold, confident signature. He had been so proud that day. He had bought that house for his mother so she would never have to rent again. He paid the mortgage, he did the repairs, it was his gift to her. I flipped the page to the most recent document. It was a quitclaim deed. This is a legal document used to transfer ownership of a property from one person to another, usually between family members. It looked standard at a glance. It stated that Tyrell Jackson hereby transferred all rights and ownership of the property to Vernon Jackson for the sum of $1. Then I looked at the date next to the signature. May 11th, 5 years ago. The room seemed to tilt. May 11th. I closed my eyes and the memories of that week flooded back with agonizing clarity. On May 10th, Tyrell had the accident at the construction site. By the evening of May 10th, he was in a medically induced coma at Mercy General. On May 11th, he was intubated, his hands strapped to the bed rails, his brain activity minimal. I opened my eyes and stared at the signature on the paper. It was a good forgery. They had practiced, but they had made a fatal error. On the loop of the letter Y in Tyrell there was a slight jagged edge, a hesitation. My husband had a smooth flowing hand. This signature was drawn by someone trying too hard to be perfect. But the date was the smoking gun. A man in a coma cannot sign a legal document. A man fighting for his life cannot find a notary public. I looked at the notary stamp at the bottom of the page. It belonged to a woman named Patricia Lewis. I made a mental note to look her up later. I suspected I would find a connection to Gavin, perhaps a friend of a friend or someone he had paid off. But why? Why steal the house? Tyrell let Vernon live there for free. He paid the bills. Why did they need the title in her name so badly that they would commit a felony while his body was still warm? I turned to the next document in the file and the answer screamed at me in red ink. It was a deed of trust, a mortgage document. 2 months after Tyrell died, 2 months after they stole the title, Vernon and Gavin had taken out a home equity line of credit against the house. The amount made me gasp out loud, causing the clerk to look up from her desk. $300,000. The house was fully paid off when Tyrell died. He hated debt. He had worked double shifts for years to clear that mortgage, and in 8 weeks his mother and her leech of a son-in-law had drained every cent of equity out of it. $300,000. Where did it go? Vernon was still buying clothes at discount stores. They drove leased cars. They had not renovated the kitchen. I pulled out my laptop right there on the dusty table and connected to the hotspot on my phone. I logged into the credit monitoring portal I had set up the night before using Tyrell's stolen identity profile. I traced the loan disbursement. The money had been deposited into a joint account held by Vernon and Gavin. And then a week later, it was transferred in a single lump sum to an offshore exchange platform. I recognized the name of the exchange immediately. It was a cryptocurrency platform that had collapsed in a massive scandal 2 years ago. I sat back in the hard wooden chair and covered my mouth to keep from laughing hysterically. It was so pathetic it was almost tragic. Gavin, the failed entrepreneur, the man who thought he was smarter than everyone in the room, had bet the entire family home on a crypto scheme. And he had lost. He had lost everything. I looked at the current status of the loan. My fingers traced the line that confirmed my suspicions. The loan was in default. They had not made a payment in 4 months. There was a notice of sale filed just last week. Foreclosure. The bank was coming for the house. The auction date was set for 30 days from now. Suddenly everything made sense. The desperation, the aggression, the $250 a month. They were not buying medicine for Vernon's back. They were paying the interest on the loan to keep the bank from seizing the property. But the interest rates had adjusted. The payments had ballooned. My $250 was no longer enough. That was why they needed my car. They were going to sell my Honda for scraps to make one more mortgage payment to buy themselves another month of time. They were drowning. They were flailing in deep water, and they were trying to use me as a life raft. I looked down at the forged deed one last time. They had stolen my husband's legacy. They had gambled it away on a get-rich-quick scheme, and now they were about to be homeless. A normal person might feel pity. A normal person might confront them and scream. But I was not feeling normal. I was feeling surgical. If the bank foreclosed on the house, it would be sold to the highest bidder on the courthouse steps. The money would go to pay off the debt, and Gavin and Vernon would be on the street. That was a punishment, yes. But it was not enough. It was too impersonal. I wanted them to know it was me. I wanted them to know that the woman they called a cash cow was the one holding the slaughterhouse hammer. I took out my phone and took high-resolution photos of every document: the forged signature, the notary stamp, the loan amount, the foreclosure notice. Then I carefully closed the file and returned it to the clerk. "Thank you," I said to the woman behind the glass. "You have been very helpful." I walked out into the sunshine. The city noise washed over me, but I felt calm. I had 30 days. 30 days until the auction. That was plenty of time. I walked to a bench nearby and sat down. I pulled up my investment portfolio on my phone. I had been saving for years. I had a diversified portfolio of index funds, bonds, and high-yield savings. I looked at the total number. It was more than enough. I could buy the debt. I could contact the bank and purchase the distressed mortgage note. It is a complex financial maneuver, but I deal with complex data every day. If I bought the note, I would become the lender. I would become the bank. I imagined the look on Gavin's face. He was terrified of the bank foreclosing. He had no idea that something far worse could happen. He had no idea that the bank could sell his debt to his sister-in-law. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. I had a lot of work to do. I needed to set up an LLC so they wouldn't see my name on the purchase documents. I needed to transfer funds. I needed to coordinate with my lawyer. But first, I had to play the part. I had to go back to being the scared, broke widow. I had to let them think they had won. I had to let them think that taking my car had saved them. I unlocked my phone and sent a text to Ebony. "I hope the car helps," I typed. "I am taking the bus to work today. Please tell Vernon I am praying for her health." I hit send and watched the message deliver. I was praying all right. I was praying that they would enjoy these last 30 days in that house. Because after that, every brick, every beam, every blade of grass would belong to me. And unlike Tyrell, I was not the charitable type. The morning after I discovered the truth about the house deed, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of black coffee and my phone in my hand. The sun was just coming up, casting long shadows across the granite countertops of my real home, the one my in-laws did not know existed. I had spent the night reviewing the foreclosure documents and the forged quitclaim deed. My anger had distilled into a cold, hard resolve. It was time to cut the cord. I opened my messaging app and created a group chat with Vernon, Gavin, and Ebony. I typed a message that I had drafted a dozen times in my head. I cannot do this anymore. The stress is affecting my health and my ability to care for Leo. I have no more money to give. Do not contact me again. I am blocking these numbers for my own peace of mind. I hit send. Then one by one, I went through my contacts and blocked them. And I blocked their cell phones, I blocked their home line, I even blocked the burner number Gavin sometimes used when he was dodging debt collectors. The silence that followed was instant, but I knew it was heavy. I knew that on the other side of town, in that stolen house on Oak Street, phones were pinging and chaos was erupting. They had just lost their income stream. They had just lost the sucker who paid the interest on their fraudulent loan. I put my phone down and exhaled. It felt like dropping a heavy backpack I had been carrying for 5 years. I went to work that day feeling lighter than I had in a decade. I parked my Honda in the employee lot at the back of the hospital near the loading dock where the security cameras had the best angle. I walked into the building not as the struggling widow, but as the woman who held the fate of 3 con artists in her hands. I spent the morning running SQL queries and generating reports, losing myself in the comfort of numbers that did not lie. But the peace did not last. At 5 o'clock, I walked out to the parking lot. The heat of the day was still rising off the asphalt, making the air shimmer. As I turned the corner toward my spot, I stopped dead in my tracks. A small crowd of nurses and orderlies had gathered near the back row. They were whispering, pointing phones, and shaking their heads. My stomach dropped, not with fear but with a weary anticipation. I pushed through the crowd. My Honda was unrecognizable. Someone had taken a can of industrial-grade red spray paint and unleashed fury upon it. A jagged red line ran from the front headlight all the way to the rear bumper. The word "traitor" was scrawled in dripping crimson letters across the driver's side door. The windshield was covered in a web of red paint, blinding any view from the inside. I stood there staring at the vandalism. The paint was still tacky and the heat smelling of chemicals and rage. I heard a nurse behind me whisper, "Oh my God, poor Jada. Who would do something like that?" I knew exactly who would do something like that. It was a tantrum. It was the lash out of a parasite that had been ripped away from its host. Gavin and Ebony had come here in broad daylight and defaced the very car they had forced me to sign over to them just 48 hours ago. The irony was staggering. They had destroyed their own collateral because they were too blinded by spite to think clearly. I did not scream. I did not cry. I pulled out my phone and took pictures. I photographed the word "traitor." I photographed the license plate, which was now splattered with red. Then I walked over to the security booth. The guard, Mr. Henderson, was an old friend of mine. He looked at me with sympathetic eyes. "I already pulled the footage, Ms. Jackson," he said quietly, handing me a USB drive. It was a blue pickup truck. 2 individuals. 1 male, 1 female. They were not wearing masks. You can see their faces clear as day. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I said, pocketing the drive. "Please file an official incident report. I will need it for insurance. And for court." I arranged for a tow truck and took a rideshare home. I thought the physical attack was the end of it for the day. I was wrong. The physical attack was just the distraction. The real assault was happening in the digital world where I could not scrub the paint away. Later that evening, I was making dinner for Leo when my phone buzzed. It was a text from a colleague in the billing department. A woman named Sarah who loved gossip almost as much as she loved her cats. Jada, the text read, "You need to check the Neighborhood Watch Facebook group right now. I do not believe a word of it, but people are talking." I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. I opened my laptop and navigated to the community page. It was a popular group for our suburb, used mostly for finding lost dogs and complaining about noise. But today the top post had over 200 comments. The post was written by a user named Justice for Elders. The profile picture was a generic stock photo of an American flag. But the voice was unmistakably Gavin. The post read, "It is a sad day when a woman turns her back on the family that took her in. Jada Jackson, who works at Mercy General, has abandoned her sick, disabled mother-in-law to starve. While she claims poverty, we have learned that she is sleeping with her department head to keep her job and funding a secret lifestyle while her late husband's mother cannot afford insulin. She drives a beat-up car to play the victim but leaves an old woman to die. Shame on you, Jada. The truth always comes out." I sat there reading the words as my heart rate remained eerily steady. The accusations were wild and incoherent. The claim about sleeping with my boss was particularly laughable since my boss was a 60-year-old woman named Martha who spent her weekends birdwatching. But the comments section was a cesspool. People who did not know me were piling on. "Monster," wrote one user. "Someone should call social services," wrote another. "This is why you cannot trust people who forget where they came from," wrote a third. They were destroying my reputation. They were poisoning the community well against me. In their minds, this was the ultimate punishment. In their world, reputation was currency, and shaming was the weapon of choice. They wanted me to panic. They wanted me to unblock them and beg for mercy. They wanted me to post a defensive comment so they could drag me into a public mud fight. But I was not going to fight in the mud. I was a data analyst. I dealt in facts, not fiction. I took screenshots of the post. I took screenshots of every single comment. I clicked on the Justice for Elders profile and traced the creation date. It was made 2 hours ago. I copied the URL. Then I did something they never expected. I did absolutely nothing. I did not reply. I did not report the post to the admins. I let it stay up. I let the lies marinate, because in the state of Georgia, defamation of character is a serious civil offense. And when you combine it with false accusations of sexual misconduct in a professional workplace, it becomes a liability that can bankrupt a person for life. Gavin thought he was ruining me. In reality, he was handing me the nails for his own coffin. He was documenting his own malice. He was proving to a future judge that his harassment was systematic, public, and relentless. I closed the laptop and walked into the kitchen. Leo was sitting at the table eating his spaghetti, oblivious to the fact that his mother was being painted as a villain by his own uncle. "Mom," he asked, looking up with big, innocent eyes, "why are we taking the bus to school tomorrow? Is the car broken?" I kissed his forehead, smoothing back his hair. "Yes, baby," I said softly. "The car is broken. But do not worry. Mommy is going to get a new one soon, and we are going to be just fine." I went to bed that night with the USB drive on my nightstand and the screenshots saved to the cloud. They had escalated the war. They had moved from financial abuse to property damage and character assassination. They were flailing, hitting out blindly, because they were terrified. They knew the money was gone, and they were trying to bully it back. But they had made a critical error. By attacking my reputation, they had threatened my livelihood. And by attacking my car, they had threatened my safety. The gloves were off now. I lay in the dark listening to the hum of the city, and I realized that I did not just want my house back. I did not just want my money back. I wanted justice. And justice was going to look a lot like a quiet courtroom and a gavel coming down with the weight of 5 years of silence. Let them paint the town red. I was about to paint them into a corner they could never escape. The attacks on my car and my reputation were infuriating, but they were distractions. I could handle a spray-painted Honda. I could handle strangers on the internet calling me names. I had the armor of truth, and the shield of a bank account they could not touch. But I had forgotten that a wounded animal does not just bite the hunter. It attacks the thing the hunter loves most. I had forgotten to protect the one flank that mattered. My son Leo. The next afternoon I left work early. The anxiety in my chest was a physical weight. I drove the rental car I had picked up that morning, a nondescript silver sedan that blended into traffic. I wanted to get to Leo's school early. I wanted to see his face and make sure the poison from the internet hadn't leaked into his second-grade classroom. When I pulled up to the curb of Lincoln Elementary, the dismissal bell had not yet rung. Usually the playground was empty, but today there was a commotion near the chain-link fence that separated the school grounds from the public sidewalk. I squinted through the windshield. I saw a teacher, Mrs. Gable, gesturing wildly. I saw the school resource officer stepping forward, his hand resting on his belt. And then I saw the source of the chaos. It was Vernon. She was not wearing her usual house dress. She was dressed in black like a woman in mourning. She was clinging to the fence, her fingers laced through the metal diamonds, wailing at the top of her lungs. I rolled down my window and the sound hit me like a physical blow. "My grandson," she screamed. "I just want to see my grandson. Why are you keeping him from me? She is evil. His mother is evil." My heart stopped. I threw the car into park and scrambled out, leaving the door open. I ran toward the gate, my heels clicking frantically on the pavement. As I got closer, I saw him. Leo was standing near the swing set, his small backpack looking too big for his shoulders. He was not playing. He was frozen, staring at the woman screaming his name. "Get away from there!" I yelled, my voice cracking. Vernon spun around. When she saw me, her face twisted into a mask of triumph and malice. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "There she is, the devil herself. Tell him, Jada. Tell my grandson why you want his grandma to die." The resource officer stepped between us, blocking Vernon from the gate. "Ma'am, you need to leave property right now or you will be arrested for trespassing." Vernon slumped against the fence, sobbing theatrically, loud enough for every parent in the pickup line to hear. "I just wanted to give him these." She held up a bag of candy bars. "My baby loves chocolate. I just wanted to say goodbye before I pass away." I rushed past the officer and through the gate. I fell to my knees in front of Leo. He was trembling. His eyes were wide and filled with a confusion no 8-year-old should ever have to process. I reached out to hug him, but he flinched. That tiny involuntary recoil broke me in a way the foreclosure fraud never could. "Leo. Baby. It is okay," I whispered, reaching for his hand. "Mommy is here." He looked at me and his lower lip quivered. "Grandma says you steal her medicine," he said, his voice so quiet it was almost lost in the wind. "She said you want her to go to heaven so you can keep all the money. Is that true, Mommy? Do you hate Grandma?" I looked up at Vernon, who was now being escorted away by the officer. She looked back at me over her shoulder and winked. It was a small, quick movement, but it carried a message loud and clear. "If you cut off my money, I will cut out your heart." I drove Leo home in silence. He refused to look at me. He stared out the window, clutching the strap of his seatbelt. Every time I tried to speak, to explain, to tell him that adults sometimes lie, he just shook his head. She had planted a seed of doubt in his innocent mind. She had weaponized his love for his father's family against me. It was not just cruel, it was strategic. It was gaslighting of the highest order. When we got home, I made him his favorite grilled cheese sandwich, but he barely touched it. He went to his room and closed the door. I stood in the hallway listening to the muffled sounds of my son crying into his pillow. I wanted to kick down the door and hold him. I wanted to drive back to Oak Street and burn that house to the ground myself. But I knew that violence would only prove Vernon right. If I acted crazy, I would lose him. I went to my office and grabbed my keys. I called Mrs. Higgins to come sit with Leo. When she arrived, her face was grim. She had heard about the scene at the school. "Go," she said gently, pushing me toward the door. "Do what you have to do. I will read him a story. I will make sure he knows he is safe." I drove straight to the county courthouse. It was late, but the emergency filing clerk was still open. I marched up to the glass partition, my hands shaking with adrenaline. I need to file for an emergency restraining order, I said. I need an order of protection for myself and my minor child against Vernon Jackson. The clerk, a tired woman who looked like she had seen too much drama, handed me a clipboard. Fill this out, she said without looking up. Be specific. List all incidents of physical violence or imminent threats of bodily harm. I took the pen and started writing. I wrote about the extortion. I wrote about the fraud. I wrote about the scene at the school. I wrote about the psychological trauma she was inflicting on my son. I wrote until my hand cramped. An hour later, I was sitting in a small hearing room in front of a magistrate. He was an older man with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He flipped through my paperwork, sighing loudly. "Ms. Jackson," he said, peering over his spectacles, "I see a lot of allegations here about financial disputes. I see claims about identity theft, which are serious matters for the police. But for a restraining order, I need proof of danger. Did Mrs. Jackson hit your son?" "No," I said, gripping the edge of the table, "but she is emotionally abusing him. She went to his school and screamed that I was killing her. She is traumatizing him." The magistrate took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Look, I sympathize. Family disputes are ugly, but shouting at a fence is not a crime. Telling a child that a parent is mean is poor taste, but it is not physical abuse. Without a documented threat of violence, I cannot grant an emergency ex parte order. This is his grandmother we are talking about. The courts are hesitant to sever family bonds without significant cause." I felt the blood drain from my face. Sever family bonds. She was trying to sever my relationship with my own son. "So she has to hit him first?" I asked, my voice rising. "She has to hurt him physically before you will help me." The magistrate frowned. "Lower your voice, Ms. Jackson. I am saying that this sounds like a civil matter. You need to file for a modification of custody or handle this in family court. Restraining orders are for immediate physical safety. Application denied." He stamped the paper with a heavy thud. That sound echoed in the empty room like a gunshot. I walked out of the courthouse into the cooling evening air. The system had failed me. The law was designed to react to blood, not to prevent the poison that causes it. They didn't see the invisible bruises Vernon was leaving on Leo's soul. They didn't see that she was using him as a pawn in a game of financial chess. I sat in my rental car and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I thought about Vernon winking at me. She knew. She knew the law better than I did. She knew exactly how far she could push without crossing the line into criminal assault. She was betting that I would play by the rules. She was betting that I would wait for the courts to save me. But she had made a miscalculation. She thought she was fighting Jada the widow. She thought she was fighting Jada, the single mother who was afraid of conflict. She did not realize that by coming for my son, she had killed that version of me completely. I started the car. I did not drive home immediately. I drove to a parking lot overlooking the city skyline. I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder labeled Project Foreclosure. I looked at the countdown clock I had set up. 27 days until the auction. It was too long. I could not wait 27 days. If I waited, Leo would be subjected to a month of their torment. I needed to accelerate the timeline. I needed to bring the house of cards down now. I opened a new browser tab and logged into a dark web forum I monitored for data security trends. It was a place where hackers and information brokers traded secrets. I wasn't there to buy illegal data. I was there to leak truth. Gavin had mentioned investors for his crypto scheme. He had mentioned partners. I knew from my research that these were not legitimate businessmen. They were loan sharks. They were dangerous men who did not use the court system to collect debts. If the law wouldn't protect my son, maybe I needed to introduce Gavin to a different kind of justice. I began to type. I began to compile a dossier of Gavin's financial status. I was going to let his creditors know exactly where their money had gone. I looked at the picture of Leo on my dashboard. "I will protect you," I whispered. even if I have to burn the whole world down to do it. The magistrate said I needed a threat of violence. Fine. I wouldn't be the one making the threat. I would just open the door and let the wolves in. The gloves were not just off, they were incinerated. The knock on the door came at exactly 9:15 at night. It was not the polite tap of a neighbor returning a borrowed cup of sugar. It was the heavy, authoritative pounding of someone who believes they have the right to break your door down if you do not open it. I was sitting on the couch with Leo reading a book about space travel, trying to scrub the memory of his grandmother screaming at him from his mind. When the sound echoed through the apartment, Leo jumped and dropped his book. His eyes went wide with fear. "Stay here, baby," I said, keeping my voice calm, even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Standing in the hallway were two people, a woman in a navy blue windbreaker and a man with a badge clipped to his belt. I did not need to ask who they were. I knew that jacket. I knew that look. It was Child Protective Services. Gavin and Vernon had pulled the nuclear option. They had called the government to come and take my son. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. I did not leave the chain on. I swung it wide open because I had absolutely nothing to hide. "Good evening," I said, standing tall in the doorway. "Can I help you?" The woman stepped forward, holding up credentials. "Ms. Jackson, I am caseworker Davis and this is Officer Miller. We received an anonymous report regarding the welfare of a minor in this residence. The report alleges the presence of narcotics in the home and significant physical neglect of the child, Leo Jackson. We need to come in and conduct an immediate welfare check." I stepped aside and swept my arm toward the living room. "Please," I said, "come in." They stepped over the threshold, bracing themselves for what they expected to find. Based on Gavin's report, they were likely expecting a cramped, dirty apartment smelling of weed and despair. They were expecting to find a malnourished child and a mother high on something illegal. Instead, they stepped into my sanctuary. They stepped onto polished hardwood floors covered by a Persian rug. They saw the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. They saw the bookshelves lined with encyclopedias and coding manuals. They smelled the faint scent of lavender and the dinner I had cooked earlier, organic roasted chicken and vegetables. Caseworker Davis stopped in the center of the living room. She looked around slowly, blinking, as if she had walked into the wrong movie set. She looked at the expensive ergonomic furniture. She looked at the immaculate kitchen with its stainless steel appliances. She looked at Leo, who was sitting on the couch in clean pajamas, holding a hardcover book. "Ms. Jackson," she said, her tone shifting from aggressive to confused. The report stated that the child was sleeping on a mattress on the floor and that the residence was uninhabitable. I closed the door and locked it. I walked over to the kitchen island and picked up a thick black binder. I had prepared this binder 3 years ago when I first started investing aggressively, just in case something ever happened to me. But tonight it served a different purpose. The person who made that report is my brother-in-law, Gavin Miller. I said, my voice cool and professional. He is currently angry because I stopped paying his mortgage. He has a history of making false allegations when he does not get money. Officer Miller walked over to Leo and knelt down. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "That is a cool book. Are you okay? Do you feel safe here?" Leo looked at the officer and then at me. "I am okay," he said. "My mom makes good chicken. Are you here to take me away like Grandma said?" The officer's face softened. "No, son. We are just checking in." I walked over to caseworker Davis and handed her the binder. Inside, you will find Leo's perfect attendance record from Lincoln Elementary. You will find his pediatric records showing he is in the 90th percentile for height and weight. You will find receipts for his math tutor and his piano lessons. She flipped through the pages, her eyebrows rising with every sheet. "But Ms. Jackson, the report mentioned narcotics, specifically that you were using and selling methamphetamines out of this apartment." I turned the page for her. I work for Mercy General Hospital as a senior data analyst. Because I handle sensitive patient data involving federal insurance claims, I am subject to random mandatory drug screenings every 30 days. Here is my result from yesterday. Negative for all substances. And here is the one from last month. And the month before that. She looked at the lab reports. They were official stamped documents from her own county's health department. She looked back at the apartment. She looked at me standing there in my silk loungewear looking nothing like the addict Gavin had described. "May I see the refrigerator in the child's bedroom?" she asked. It was a formality now. I could hear the apology in her voice. I led her to the kitchen. I opened the double doors of the fridge. It was fully stocked with fresh produce milk juice and meal-prepped containers. I led her to Leo's room. It was a spaceship-themed wonderland, with a high-end telescope by the window and a bed made with crisp, clean linens. We went back to the living room. Officer Miller was showing Leo his badge and talking about baseball. Caseworker Davis closed her notebook. She looked angry, but not at me. "Ms. Jackson," she said, "I apologize for the intrusion. It is very clear that this is a safe and nurturing environment. The disparity between the report and reality is extreme." "It is harassment," I said. "It is a weaponized use of state resources to terrorize a widow and her son. And I would like to file a formal complaint against the caller." "We cannot release the name of the anonymous caller," she said automatically. "I do not need you to release it," I countered. "I am giving it to you. Gavin Miller. Please note in your file that a bitter relative is using your agency to stalk me. Because when I take him to court, I want your report to be Exhibit A." She nodded grimly, making a note in her file. "We will mark this case as unfounded and closed, and I will flag the system regarding any future calls from this individual. You have a lovely home, Ms. Jackson. Good night." They left. The door clicked shut. The silence returned, but the air in the room had changed. It was charged with electricity. I walked over to Leo and hugged him tight. He smelled like baby shampoo and innocence. They had tried to take this away from me. They had tried to put my son in foster care just to squeeze a few more dollars out of me. I sent Leo to bed telling him everything was fine. Then I went to my office. I did not sit down at my computer. I picked up my cell phone. I dialed a number I had saved under the name The Shark. It was my lawyer, a woman named Rebecca, who cost $600 an hour and was worth every penny. She answered on the second ring. "Jada," she said. "It is late. Is everything okay?" "They called CPS," I said. My voice was no longer the voice of a data analyst. It was the voice of a warlord. They tried to claim I was on drugs and neglecting Leo. There was a pause on the line. Then I heard the sound of Rebecca taking off her glasses and setting them on a table. "Okay," Rebecca said, her tone dropping an octave. "The gloves are off. You wanted to wait for the foreclosure auction. You wanted to do this cleanly." I looked out the window at the city lights. I saw the reflection of my own eyes in the glass. They were hard and dark. "Screw clean," I said. "They crossed the line. They brought the government to my door. I want to activate Plan B." "Plan B is aggressive," Jada, Rebecca warned. "It is scorched earth. If we do this, there is no coming back. We will not just take the house. We will go after Gavin for the fraud. We will go after Vernon for the benefits she is claiming while dancing salsa. We will trigger the IRS audit on Gavin's shell company. We will bury them under so much litigation they will not be able to breathe." "Do it," I said. "Are you sure?" I looked at the closed door of Leo's bedroom. I thought about the fear in his eyes when the police officer walked in. I thought about Gavin laughing on the porch. I thought about Vernon dancing while I clipped coupons. I want them to lose everything, Rebecca. I want Gavin in handcuffs. I want Vernon in a state facility. I want to buy the debt on that house, and I want to be the one standing on the lawn when the sheriff evicts them. Execute Plan B. Start tonight. I hung up the phone. I did not feel guilt. I did not feel remorse. I felt powerful. They had poked the bear for 5 years. They had poked and prodded and stolen. And now the bear was awake. And she was hungry. The morning after the Child Protective Services visit, I did not go into the office. I sat at my dining table with my laptop open and a cup of cold coffee that I had forgotten to drink. The rage that had been burning inside me since last night had cooled into something solid and sharp. It was no longer a fire. It was a weapon. I called my lawyer Rebecca and gave the green light for Plan B. Plan B was not a legal maneuver. It was a trap. I knew Gavin's financial situation better than he did. I knew that he had exactly $12 in his checking account. I knew that the foreclosure auction on the house was 3 weeks away. I knew that he was waking up every morning in a cold sweat, terrified that his neighbors would see an eviction notice taped to the front door. Desperation makes people stupid, and Gavin was already not a very smart man. I spent the next 3 hours creating a ghost. I registered a limited liability company called Apex Horizon Holdings. I set up a sleek professional website filled with stock photos of skyscrapers and smiling handshakes. I created an email address that sounded expensive and impatient. Then I sent an email to Gavin's business account, the one he used for his failed crypto ventures. The subject line was simple: cash offer for 42 Oak Street. In the body of the email, I played the role of a predatory real estate developer. I wrote that my firm was looking to acquire properties in his specific neighborhood for a luxury redevelopment project. I offered him $550,000. Cash. Closing in 48 hours. No inspections, no questions asked. It was a ridiculous offer. The house was worth $400,000 on a good day. But to a drowning man, a lifeline looks like a lifeline whether it is made of gold or straw. I hit send and waited. It took him exactly 7 minutes to reply. I watched the response pop up on my screen. I could practically hear his heart pounding through the text. He was eager. He was manic. He said the house was available immediately. He said he was the sole owner. He said he could close tomorrow. I typed back instantly, keeping the tone aggressive. I told him my legal team needed to see the deed. I told him that my research showed a Jada Jackson listed on the original title and as a potential heir. I told him that for the deal to go through, I needed signatures from both Vernon Jackson and Jada Jackson. Both parties had to be present at the signing. This was the test. This was the moment where an honest man would call me. He would call me and beg. He would ask me to sign the house over to save the family. If he had done that, if he had shown even an ounce of humility, I might have stopped. But Gavin did not call me. Instead, he emailed Apex Horizon Holdings back. He lied. He wrote that Jada Jackson was unavailable due to illness, but that she had given him power of attorney. I replied immediately. No power of attorney. My investors require a wet signature. Bring Jada Jackson to the notary tomorrow at noon, or the deal is off. I sat back and watched the cursor blink. I knew what he was thinking. He could not bring me. He had just spray-painted my car. He had just called CPS on me. He knew I would never sign that paper. He was staring at $500,000, and the only thing standing in his way was me. I waited for 2 hours. Then my private investigator Marcus texted me. He sent a photo taken from a long-lens camera. It showed Gavin sitting at a Starbucks downtown. He was not alone. Sitting across from him was a woman. She was African American. She had a similar build to me. She was wearing a wig that looked vaguely like my hairstyle. I zoomed in on the photo. Gavin was sliding a thick envelope across the table. The woman opened it and peeked inside. It was cash. Probably the last of the cash from the pawnbroker. Gavin was talking animatedly, using his hands to gesture. He pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. He was showing her how to sign something. He was hiring an actress. He was hiring a stranger to impersonate me. He was going to walk into a notary office with a fake Jada Jackson and forge my signature on a federal deed transfer to sell a house he did not own to a company that did not exist. It was bold. It was stupid. And it was a felony. I texted Marcus back. Do not intervene. Just record everything. I want 4K video. I want audio. I want to see the ink hitting the paper. The next day at noon, I sat in my car across the street from the notary office. It was a small strip mall place next to a dry cleaner. I was wearing sunglasses and a hat slouching low in the seat. I watched Gavin's truck pull up. Vernon was in the passenger seat. She looked nervous, clutching her purse. Then a sedan pulled up. The woman from the coffee shop got out. She was dressed conservatively in a blouse and slacks, trying to look like a grieving widow. She adjusted her wig and walked toward Gavin. Gavin gave her a quick hug, not of affection, but of conspiracy. He handed her a file folder. I watched them walk into the office. I could not see inside, but I was listening. I had Marcus go inside 10 minutes earlier, posing as a customer waiting for a fax. He had his phone propped up on a magazine rack, recording the entire room. I sat there in the silence of my car and imagined the scene. I imagined the notary asking for ID. I imagined Gavin sliding a fake driver's license across the desk. I knew he had one. He had bragged years ago about a guy he knew who made high-quality fakes. I imagined the woman picking up the pen. I imagined her signing my name, Jada Jackson. Every loop of the pen was a nail in their coffin. Every nod from Vernon was an admission of guilt. They were selling my husband's legacy for quick cash. They thought they were tricking a developer. They thought they were escaping the bank. 20 minutes later, they walked out. Gavin was beaming. He looked like he had just won the lottery. He shook the fake Jada's hand, and she got in her car and drove away. Gavin and Vernon got back into the truck. I saw Gavin pound the steering wheel in celebration. He thought he had done it. He thought the money would be wired to his account by 5 o'clock. I waited until they were gone. Then I drove home. I walked into my office and opened the secure link Marcus had sent me. The video was perfect. The audio was crisp. "I am Jada Jackson," the woman said on the video. "Yes, I agree to the sale." I watched it 3 times. I felt a strange sense of detachment. This was the family my husband had asked me to protect. This was the blood he valued so much. They were not just thieves. They were erasing me. They were replacing me with a counterfeit version because the real version was too inconvenient. I downloaded the video. I saved it to 3 different hard drives. Then I called Rebecca. "We have it," I said. "We have the forgery. We have the impersonation. We have the fraudulent sale." "Good," Rebecca said. Her voice was sharp. "Do you want to call the police now?" "No," I said. "Not yet. The wire transfer from my shell company is scheduled to fail in exactly 24 hours. I want them to sweat. I want them to check their bank account every 5 minutes, waiting for money that will never come. And while they are waiting, I want to finalize the purchase of the banknote." But Rebecca paused. "If we buy the note, we become the ones evicting them." "Exactly," I said. "I do not want the bank to kick them out. The bank is a faceless corporation. The bank does not care. I want to be the one to put the lock on the door. I want to be the one standing there when the sheriff comes. I want them to see my face, the real face, not the fake one they hired." I hung up the phone. I looked at the picture of Tyrell on my desk. I picked it up and traced his jawline with my thumb. "I am sorry, Tyrell," I whispered. "I tried to keep my promise. I really did. But you cannot save people who are determined to drown, and you certainly cannot save people who try to pull you under with them." I put the picture down face down. The time for mourning was over. The trap was sprung. The cheese had been taken, and now the heavy steel bar was about to come down on their necks. I closed my laptop and went to the kitchen to make dinner. Tonight we were having steak. I felt like celebrating. The conference room at the law firm of Sterling and Finch was located on the 42nd floor. It was a space designed to intimidate. The walls were made of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline, while the center of the room was dominated by a mahogany table that cost more than most people's cars. The air conditioning was set to a crisp 68 degrees, and the smell of expensive leather and old money permeated the air. I had chosen this location specifically. I wanted them to feel small before I even walked in the room. Inside the room, my in-laws were waiting. I watched them for a moment through the security feed on my phone before I made my entrance. They were dressed in what they considered to be high society attire. Vernon was wearing a wide-brimmed church hat and a sequined dress that was far too tight for a Tuesday afternoon. Ebony was wearing a designer knockoff tracksuit and scrolling furiously on her phone, likely checking her bank account for a wire transfer that would never arrive. And Gavin. Gavin was pacing back and forth wearing a shiny gray suit that he had probably bought on clearance for this specific occasion. He looked manic. He looked like a man who had just pulled off the heist of the century and was waiting for the getaway driver. They were expecting a representative from Apex Horizon Holdings. They were expecting a check for $550,000. They were dreaming of luxury cars and Florida condos. They had no idea that they were sitting inside the belly of the beast. I adjusted the lapels of my white tailored suit. It was a stark contrast to the drab cardigans and worn-out jeans they were used to seeing me wear. I had spent $600 on a blowout and professional makeup. I was not wearing my wedding ring. I was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet I had bought for myself last year with my bonus check. I nodded to the sheriff standing beside me. He was a tall, imposing man with a badge that caught the light. "Are you ready, Ms. Jackson?" he asked. I took a deep breath. I had been ready for 5 years. "Let us go," I said. I pushed open the double-glass doors. The sound of my stilettos hitting the marble floor echoed like gunshots. Click, click, click. The conversation in the room stopped instantly. 3 heads turned in unison. For a split second there was silence, then confusion, then recognition. Gavin was the first to speak, his face twisted into a sneer of disbelief. "Jada, what on earth are you doing here?" I did not stop walking. I moved with a predatory grace, heading straight for the head of the table. I did not look at him. I did not look at Vernon. I pulled out the heavy leather executive chair at the head of the table and sat down. I placed my sleek black briefcase on the mahogany surface and folded my hands on top of it. Gavin let out a harsh laugh. He looked at Ebony and rolled his eyes. "Did you get lost, Jada? The cleaning staff entrance is in the back. Or did you come here to beg for money again? Look, we are in the middle of a very important business meeting. We are selling the house. We are going to be rich. If you leave now and do not embarrass us, maybe I will throw you a few $100 for groceries," Vernon chimed in, adjusting her hat. "You have some nerve showing up here after the way you treated us. And look at you, wearing a white suit like you are somebody. Did you steal that from a patient at the hospital?" I stared at them. I let the silence stretch. I let it become uncomfortable. I let them sweat. Then I finally spoke. My voice was calm, low, and commanded absolute authority. "I did not steal this suit, Vernon. And I am not here to beg." Gavin slammed his hand on the table. "Then why are you here? Get out! We are waiting for the CEO of Apex Horizon Holdings. You are trespassing." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single file folder. I slid it across the long table. It spun perfectly, coming to a stop right in front of Gavin. "Open it," I said. Gavin looked at the folder, then at me. He hesitated. His arrogance was starting to crack, replaced by a creeping dread. He opened the folder. Inside was not a purchase agreement. It was a deed of trust assignment. It was a document stamped by the bank and the county clerk transferring the mortgage note of 42 Oak Street from the bank to a private holding company. I saw his eyes scan the document. I saw the blood drain from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. I saw his hands start to shake. "What is this?" he whispered. I leaned back in the chair and crossed my legs. "It is a notification of debt assignment, Gavin. You see, when a mortgage is in default and foreclosure is imminent, the bank often sells the bad debt to private investors to cut their losses. I bought your debt this morning." Ebony grabbed the paper from his hand. "What does that mean?" she shrieked. "What is she talking about?" "It means," I said, my voice cutting through her panic like a knife, "that I am not the maid, I am not the cash cow, and I am certainly not the grieving widow you can push around anymore. I own the mortgage on the house. I own the interest. I own the penalties. And as of 9 a.m. this morning, I am your new creditor." Vernon stood up, knocking her chair over. You lie. You do not have that kind of money, you drive a rusted Honda, you live in an apartment. You are nothing. I signaled to the sheriff who had been standing quietly by the door. He stepped forward, his hand resting on his utility belt. The presence of law enforcement sucked the remaining air out of the room. The Honda was a choice, Vernon, I said. Just like the $250 was a choice. I wanted to help family. I wanted to believe you were decent people struggling with grief, but you were just leeches, and now I am the salt. Gavin looked at the sheriff and then back at me. He looked like a trapped rat. But we have a deal, he stammered. Apex Horizon. They offered $550,000. We signed the papers yesterday. The money is coming today. We can pay you off. We will pay you double. I smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. Apex Horizon does not exist, Gavin. I created it on a Sunday afternoon while my son was taking a nap. There is no investor. There is no money. There is only me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He slumped into his chair. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He realized he had been played. He realized that the woman he called stupid had outsmarted him at every turn. So you tricked us, Ebony screamed, jumping to her feet. That is fraud. Officer, arrest her. She tricked us. The sheriff stepped closer, his face grim. Actually, ma'am, he said in a deep rumble, the only fraud I see here is the sale of a property you did not own, and the forgery of a signature. I reached into my briefcase again. This time I pulled out a tablet. I tapped the screen and turned it around so they could all see. It was the video from the notary office. The video of the fake Jada signing the deed. The video of Gavin smiling and shaking hands. Gavin Miller, I said, standing up and leaning over the table. Did you really think I would not find out? Did you really think you could hire an actress to impersonate me and sell my husband's legacy for crypto money? Gavin began to weep. It was a pathetic sound. He put his head in his hands. I am sorry, Jada. I was desperate. The guys I owe money to, they said they would hurt me. Please. We are family. Do not do this. Family. I repeated the word, tasting the bile in it. Family does not spray paint traitor on a car. Family does not call CPS on a mother. Family does not steal a house from a dead man. I looked at the sheriff and nodded. Sheriff, if you would please execute the warrant. The sheriff pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Gavin Miller, he said, you are under arrest for felony fraud, identity theft, and forgery. Stand up and place your hands behind your back. Vernon screamed. She grabbed Gavin's arm, trying to pull him away from the officer. No, not my son. He is a good boy. It is her fault. She drove him to this. Ebony backed away toward the wall, her eyes darting around looking for an exit. But there was no exit. The sheriff clicked the cuffs onto Gavin's wrists. The sound was final. It was the sound of justice. And Vernon, I said, turning my attention to the mother-in-law who was now sobbing on the floor. Do not think you are walking out of here to go back to Oak Street, since I am the owner of the debt, and since the property is being used in the commission of a felony, I have exercised the acceleration clause in the mortgage. The full balance is due immediately. Since you cannot pay it, I am initiating an immediate eviction. You have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings. After that, I am changing the locks. Where will I go? Vernon wailed. I am an old woman. I have nowhere to go. I picked up my briefcase and checked my watch. I suggest you ask your daughter Ebony. Though considering she just watched her husband get arrested for a scheme she was part of, I imagine she has her own problems to worry about. I walked toward the door. I did not look back at Gavin being led away. I did not look back at Vernon wailing on the expensive carpet. I walked out of the glass room and into the hallway. I walked past the reception desk where the secretary stared at me with wide eyes. I pressed the button for the elevator. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and watched the numbers count down. 41, 40, 39. I took out my phone and called Rebecca. It is done, I said. Gavin is in custody. The eviction notice is served. How do you feel? She asked. I leaned my head back against the cool metal wall of the elevator. I thought I would feel happy. I thought I would feel triumphant. But mostly I just felt tired and free. I feel like the debt is finally paid, I said. I walked out of the building and into the bright Atlanta sunshine. The air smelled of exhaust and possibilities. I hailed a cab. I was not going back to work. I was going to pick up Leo early from school. We were going to get ice cream. And for the first time in 5 years, I was going to tell him exactly what happened without a single lie. The reign of terror was over. The Queen had taken the board. The video on the tablet screen looped again and again. It showed the woman in the wig signing my name with a flourish while Gavin patted her on the shoulder. In the silence of the conference room, the audio was deafening. You could hear Gavin's voice clearly saying that he was glad to finally get rid of the property. You could hear the fake Jada laughing about how easy it was. I watched Gavin's face as he watched himself commit a crime. The arrogance that had defined him for 5 years evaporated instantly, leaving behind only the raw panic of a man who realizes the trapdoor has just opened beneath his feet. "That is not me, Gavin," I said, my voice slicing through the air like a razor. "That woman has a mole on her left cheek. She is left-handed. I am right-handed. And most importantly, she is an actress named Tiffany, whom you hired off a Craigslist forum for $500 cash." Gavin looked up at me, his eyes wide and wet with fear. "How?" he whispered. "How do you know her name?" "Because I know everything, Gavin. I know about the Craigslist ad. I know about the burner phone you used to call her. And I know that you walked into a federally insured notary office and committed fraud. That is not a family dispute. That is a felony." The sheriff did not wait for an invitation. He stepped forward and pulled Gavin out of the expensive leather chair. Gavin stumbled, his legs giving way under the weight of reality. When the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the sound echoed off the glass walls. It was a sharp mechanical sound that signaled the end of his freedom. "You have the right to remain silent." The sheriff recited, his voice a low rumble. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Gavin began to hyperventilate. "No, wait. You cannot arrest me. I was just trying to help my mother. It was her idea. She told me to do it. She said Jada would never know." I looked at Vernon. She was clutching her chest, but this time there was no performance. Her face had turned an ashen gray color. She was staring at her son in handcuffs, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Her golden boy, the one she had prioritized over everyone else, was being dragged away because of her greed. "I am not done yet," I said, reaching into my briefcase again. Gavin stopped struggling. The room went deathly quiet. Even Ebony, who had been trying to shrink into the wallpaper, froze. I pulled out a thick stack of papers. They were not legal documents this time. They were medical records. I threw them onto the mahogany table. They slid across the polished surface and fanned out, stopping right in front of Vernon. "Pick it up, Vernon," I commanded. Her trembling hand reached out. She picked up the top sheet. It was the final billing statement from Mercy General Hospital, dated 5 years ago. "Read the bottom line," I said. "Read it out loud." Vernon squinted at the paper. Her voice was a whisper, a broken rasp. "Paid in full. Balance due 0. "That is right," I said, standing up and walking slowly around the table until I was standing directly behind her chair. "Tyrell did not leave you with debt. He left you with a clean slate. The insurance paid everything, every single surgery, every single night in the ICU. It was all covered." I leaned down close to her ear. "So tell me, Vernon, where did my $15,000 go? Where did the envelopes of cash I brought you every month go? Did they go to the pharmacy? Did they go to the doctors? Or did they go to the liquor store and the casino and the payments on that luxury SUV sitting in your driveway?" Vernon began to sob. It was a pathetic sound. "I did it for the family," she wailed. "We needed money. Tyrell was gone. Who was going to take care of us? Tyrell took care of you!" I shouted, my voice finally rising, losing its icy calm and filling with the rage of a grieving wife. He bought you a house. He paid your bills. And when he died, you spat on his memory. You looked me in the eye at his funeral and lied to me. You let me starve. You let me drive a broken car. You let me worry that I was failing him while you were eating lobster on my dime. I walked back to the head of the table. But the theft of my money is not even the worst part, I said. I pulled out the final piece of evidence. It was the credit report. The one showing the loans taken out in Tyrell's name 3 years after he was buried in the ground. You stole his identity, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You kept him alive on paper like a zombie so you could bleed him dry. You opened credit cards in the name of a dead man. You took out business loans in the name of a dead man. That is not just theft, Vernon. That is desecration. I looked at the sheriff. Add identity theft to the charges, and add Vernon Jackson as a co-conspirator. Vernon let out a strangled cry. Her eyes rolled back in her head. Her hand clawed at the edge of the table, and then she slumped forward. She slid out of the chair and hit the floor with a heavy thud. This was not the fake heart attack from the living room. This was the collapse of a woman whose entire world had just been obliterated by the truth. She lay there unconscious, her church hat askew her sequined dress, looking gaudy and cheap under the fluorescent lights. Mom Ebony screamed. She dropped her phone and fell to her knees beside her mother. Mom, wake up! Then Ebony looked up at me. Her eyes were wild. She looked from her husband in handcuffs to her mother on the floor. She saw the ships sinking, and she made a choice. She chose survival. It was not me, Ebony screamed, pointing a finger at Gavin. I told them not to do it. I told Gavin that using Tyrell's name was wrong. They forced me to go along with it, Jada. I swear, I did not sign anything. I was just the driver. Please, Jada, do not send me to jail. I have kids. I looked at her with pure disgust. 5 minutes ago she was dreaming of spending the money from the sale. Now she was throwing her own husband and mother to the wolves to save her own skin. You drove the car, Ebony, I said coldly. You ate the food. You spent the money. You are just as guilty as they are. But unlike them, you are not going to jail today. You are going to the homeless shelter. Because as of this moment, I am accelerating the eviction. You have exactly 1 hour to get your things out of my house before I change the locks. Ebony began to wail, clutching her mother's unconscious body. The sheriff was calling for paramedics on his radio. Gavin was crying in the corner. I picked up my briefcase. I checked my watch. I had a lunch date with my son. I walked past the chaos. I walked past the paramedics rushing in with a stretcher. I walked past the lawyers who were staring in shock. I did not look back. I had presented the evidence. I had delivered the verdict. And the sentence had been executed. As I stepped into the elevator, I took one last look at the glass-walled room. It looked like a crime scene. And in a way it was. It was the scene of a massacre. But I was the only one walking out alive. The chaos in the conference room was beginning to settle into a heavy, suffocating silence. The paramedics had lifted Vernon onto a stretcher, her sequins catching the fluorescent lights in a grotesque display of fallen grandeur. Gavin was weeping softly in the corner, his face pressed against the wall while the sheriff finished reading him his rights. That left only Ebony. My sister-in-law stood alone near the window, her hands trembling violently as she clutched her designer knockoff purse. She looked from her husband in cuffs to her mother on the stretcher, and then her eyes locked on me. For a moment, I saw fear. But then, as is the nature of a narcissist, the fear twisted instantly into denial. It was impossible for her to accept that I had won. It broke her worldview to believe that Jada the widow in the rusted Honda had outmaneuvered them. She took a step forward, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You are lying!" Ebony screamed, her voice cracking. "This is all a trick. You do not have the money to buy a mortgage note. You do not have the money to buy a ham sandwich. You are just a file clerk, Jada. You work in the basement of the hospital stuffing papers into boxes." She pointed a shaking finger at the briefcase on the table. "You probably forged those documents just like you accused Gavin of doing. You are a fraud. You are a broke, pathetic nobody who is trying to scare us. Who did you sleep with to get that suit? Who gave you the money for this charade? I watched her unravel. I watched her desperate attempt to rewrite reality, to fit the narrative she had created 5 years ago. To them, I was a fixed point in the universe. I was the poor relation. I was the one who needed to be pitied and exploited. If I was powerful, then they were nothing, and Ebony could not survive being nothing. I did not scream back. I did not defend myself. I did what I have done every day for the last decade. I let the data speak for itself. I walked over to the wall panel and pressed a button. The automatic blinds lowered, darkening the room. Then I pressed another button, and a large projection screen descended from the ceiling. I pulled an HDMI cable from the center console of the table and plugged it into my laptop. Ebony stopped screaming. She stared at the screen as it flickered to life. "Let me introduce you to the person you have been stealing from," I said, my voice cool and steady. The first slide appeared. It was not a bank statement. It was my professional bio from the hospital's internal executive directory. A high-resolution photo of me wearing a blazer smiled down at the room. Next to it in bold letters was my title, Director of Strategic Data Analysis and Risk Management. Ebony squinted, reading the words. Her mouth fell open. "Director," she whispered. I clicked to the next slide. It was a graph. A beautiful soaring green line that tracked my income over the last 5 years. "You thought I filed papers," I said, walking slowly toward her. "You thought I worked in the basement. You never asked, did you? In 5 years, not once did you ask me what I actually did. You assumed that because I drove an old car I was poor. You assumed that because I was quiet I was simple." I pointed to the screen. "I manage a team of 40 analysts. I oversee the fraud detection algorithms for a network of 12 hospitals. My base salary is $300,000 a year, and that does not include performance bonuses." Ebony shook her head back and forth. "No, that is impossible. If you have money, why do you live in that apartment? Why do you drive that junk car?" I clicked to the next slide. This was the one that made the lawyers in the room sit up straighter. It was a snapshot of my investment portfolio. It showed my diversified holdings in pharmaceutical stocks, medical technology startups, and municipal bonds. "I drove a junk car because cars are depreciating assets, Ebony," I said, my voice dripping with disdain. "I lived in an apartment because I was saving 70% of my income. I was playing the long game." I turned to face her fully. "While you and Gavin were busy spending the $250 I sent you on lobster dinners and champagne, I was buying stocks in the companies that manufacture the very MRI machines used in my hospital. While you were leasing a BMW to impress neighbors who do not care about you, I was maxing out my 401k and buying high-yield index funds." I took a step closer to her. "You called me a cash cow. You were right, but you were milking the wrong end. You were fighting over scraps while I was building an empire." I clicked the remote one last time. The screen changed to a digital receipt. It was a wire transfer confirmation dated 4 hours ago. The amount was $412,000. The recipient was the First National Bank. The memo line read, "Full payoff of mortgage note 42 Oak Street." Ebony stared at the number. She looked like she was going to be sick. "You asked where I got the money to buy the debt," I said. "I got it from being smarter than you. I got it from 5 years of compounding interest and disciplined investing. I bought your debt with the dividends from a single quarter of my portfolio." I walked back to the table and unplugged my laptop. The screen went black, plunging the room back into gloom. "The house you are standing in, the house you thought you sold to a developer, it belongs to me now. Not the bank. Me. I own the roof over your head. I own the floorboards under your feet. And I own the front door you are about to walk out of." Ebony slumped against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the expensive carpet. She looked small. She looked defeated. She looked like a child who had just realized the boogeyman was real. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. I looked down at her. I did not feel pity. I felt only the cold satisfaction of the equation finally balanced. I am going to do exactly what a landlord does with non-paying destructive tenants, I said. I picked up my briefcase and checked my watch. The time for talking was over. The time for action had arrived. You have 24 hours, I said, my voice ringing with finality. I want you, your husband, and your mother out of my property. I do not care where you go. I do not care if you sleep in a motel or under a bridge. But if there is a single spoon left in that kitchen, or a single sock left in a drawer by noon tomorrow, I will have the sheriff throw it on the lawn. Ebony began to cry. But Jada, she sobbed. Please, we have nowhere to go. The money from the sale was our only hope. We are broke. I walked to the door and stopped. I turned back one last time. Then maybe you should have saved that $250, I said. I opened the door and walked out. Behind me, I heard the wailing of a woman who had lost everything, but ahead of me, I saw only the open road. I had my son, I had my dignity, and now I had my house. The game was over, and I had won. The weeks that followed the confrontation in the law office were a blur of legal motions and devastating justice. I did not have to lift a finger. I simply sat back and watched the system dismantle the house of cards my in-laws had built. Gavin was arraigned 2 days later. His lawyer, a public defender who looked overworked and exhausted, tried to argue for bail. He painted Gavin as a family man who had made a mistake out of desperation. But the judge was not interested in fairy tales. The evidence I had provided was overwhelming. The video of the forgery, the offshore crypto accounts, and the sheer scale of the identity theft painted a different picture. The prosecutor labeled him a significant flight risk. I sat in the back row of the courtroom and watched as the judge denied bail. Gavin looked back at me one last time before the bailiff led him away. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with his pale complexion. There was no arrogance left in his eyes, only the hollow look of a man who knows he is going to prison for a very long time. Ebony thought she had escaped the worst of it because she had not signed the deed. She was wrong. My private investigator, Marcus, had done his job too well. We traced the purchase history of the credit cards opened in Tyrell's name. We found thousands of dollars in charges for designer handbags, shoes, and jewelry. All of them shipped to Ebony's address. All of them signed for by Ebony. Possession of stolen property and credit card fraud are serious crimes. 2 days after Gavin was locked up, the police arrived at the apartment Ebony was renting. I was not there to see it, but the neighbors told me it was quite a show. They seized everything. The Louis Vuitton bags she flaunted at church were placed in evidence bags. The car she drove was towed. She was left standing on the curb with nothing but the clothes on her back and a court summons. She was not going to prison yet, but she was facing financial ruin so complete that she would never recover. The final act of this tragedy took place on the front porch of the house on Oak Street. The 24-hour eviction notice had expired. I pulled up to the curb in my new car. It was not a Honda. It was a sleek black Mercedes SUV with tinted windows and that new car smell that screams success. I stepped out wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I did not need a power suit today. I just needed to be me. The sheriff was already there, supervising the removal of their belongings. Boxes were stacked haphazardly on the lawn. A few pieces of furniture sat near the curb, looking sad and displaced. Vernon was sitting on a plastic garden chair near the driveway, clutching a photo album. When she saw me, she stood up. She looked older than I had ever seen her. The malice was gone, replaced by a pathetic fragility. She shuffled toward me, her hands outstretched. Jada, she cried, her voice cracking. Jada, please. You cannot do this. I am an old woman. This is my home. Tyrell grew up here. I stopped just out of her reach. It is not your home, Vernon, I said calmly. It is my asset, and Tyrell has not lived here in a long time. You made sure to erase his memory the moment you started spending his money on yourself. She fell to her knees right there on the concrete walkway. She wrapped her arms around my legs, burying her face in my jeans. It was a scene straight out of a melodrama, but I felt nothing. My heart had turned to stone years ago. "Please, Jada," she sobbed. "I have nowhere to go. Ebony has lost her apartment. Gavin is in jail. I cannot live on the street. I am your mother. Tyrell loved me. If you loved him, you would not do this to his mama." I looked down at the woman weeping at my feet. I remembered the way she danced salsa when she thought I was not looking. I remembered the way she screamed at my son at his school. I remembered the taste of instant noodles while she ate lobster. I reached down and firmly unhooked her hands from my legs. I stepped back, brushing the dust off my pants. "I loved Tyrell enough to stop you from desecrating his name," I said. "And as for where you will go, I hear Ebony found a studio apartment on the other side of town. It is small, and it is in a rough neighborhood, but it is a roof. You can sleep on her floor." "I cannot live like that," Vernon wailed, looking up at me with terror. "I am sick. I need care." "Then I suggest you use the same healthcare system I use," I said, turning away. "Or maybe you can pay for a private nurse with the money you stole. Oh wait, you spent it all on crypto." I walked up the steps to the front door. The locksmith was waiting. I nodded to him, and he began to drill out the core of the lock. The sound was loud and mechanical, drowning out Vernon's sobbing. I stepped inside the house. It smelled of stale perfume and secrets. I walked through the empty rooms. I looked at the walls where Tyrell's pictures used to hang. They had taken them down years ago to make room for mirrors and art that looked expensive, but was actually cheap reproductions. I stood in the center of the living room and felt the ghosts leave. This house was not a home. It was a crime scene, and I was finally cleaning it up. I walked back out onto the porch. Vernon was being helped into a taxi by Ebony, who had arrived to collect her. They looked at me with pure hatred, but they did not say a word. They knew I held all the cards. They knew that one phone call from me could turn their civil problems into criminal ones. I watched the taxi drive away, carrying the toxicity out of my life forever. I turned to the locksmith. "Change every lock," I said, "and put a digital keypad on the front door. I do not want anyone entering this house ever again without my permission." He nodded. "You got it, ma'am." I got back in my Mercedes and drove away. I did not look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me worth looking at. The next month was a flurry of activity, but it was the good kind. I listed the house on Oak Street for sale. I priced it aggressively because I did not want to make a profit on it. I wanted it gone. I wanted the capital. When the sale closed, I took the check for $450,000 and I drove to the law offices of Sterling and Finch. I sat down with Rebecca and laid out my plan. "I want to start a scholarship fund," I said, "the Tyrell Jackson Memorial Scholarship. It will be for students who want to study architecture and engineering, just like Tyrell wanted to before he had to take that construction job to support his mother." "That is a beautiful tribute," Rebecca said, taking notes. "And there is one condition," I added, leaning forward. "I want a clause in the trust. A specific exclusionary clause. No direct descendant of Vernon Jackson or the Miller family is eligible to apply. Not now. Not ever." Rebecca smiled over the rim of her glasses. "That is very specific." "It is necessary," I said. "I want his money to go to people who actually respect hard work, not people who think they are entitled to it because of their last name." We signed the papers that afternoon. The fund was established. Tyrell's legacy would live on, not in a stolen house or a maxed-out credit card, but in the futures of bright young kids who needed a chance. A week later, I woke Leo up early. "Pack your bag, baby," I said, throwing open his curtains. "We are going on an adventure." "Where are we going?" he asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "We are going to Hawaii," I said. "Just you and me, for 2 whole weeks." We took a taxi to the airport, but we did not stand in the long security line. We walked through the priority lane. When we boarded the plane, I turned left instead of right. Leo's eyes went wide as we entered the business class cabin. The seats were like pods. There were warm towels and glasses of orange juice waiting for us. Mom, Leo whispered, climbing into his massive seat. Are we rich? I buckled his seatbelt and kissed his forehead. We are comfortable, Leo. But more importantly, we are free. As the plane taxied down the runway, I accepted a glass of champagne from the flight attendant. The bubbles were cold and sharp. I looked out the window as the engines roared to life. I watched the city of Atlanta shrink beneath us. Somewhere down there in that sprawl of concrete and trees, Gavin was sitting in a cell waiting for trial. Vernon was sleeping on a floor in a cramped apartment, complaining about her back. Ebony was waiting for a bus to take her to a minimum wage job. They had underestimated me. They looked at my silence and saw weakness. They looked at my kindness and saw stupidity. They forgot that the most dangerous person in the room is the one who listens, who watches, and who waits. I took a sip of champagne. $250. That was the monthly subscription fee I had paid to learn the truth about my family. It seemed like a lot of money at the time. But looking back, it was a bargain. It was the cheapest education I had ever received. They thought they were playing me. They thought I was the pawn. They never realized that I was the one holding the pen, writing the rules of the game. I leaned back in the soft leather seat and closed my eyes. The roar of the engines sounded like victory. I was not a widow anymore. I was not a victim. I was Jada Jackson, director, mother, survivor. And for the first time in a long time, I was happy. Have you ever had people in your life who mistook your kindness for weakness? Have you ever had to cut off family to save yourself? If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments below, what was the moment you finally decided to stand up for yourself? I read every single comment. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the best revenge is just living a life they can no longer touch. Jada's story teaches us a powerful truth. Silence is not surrender. Often it is a strategy. We are raised to believe that family is everything, but loyalty without respect is merely servitude. Jada proved that your true worth is not defined by how much you sacrifice for others, but by how fiercely you protect your peace and your children. Financial independence was her shield, but her self-respect was her sword. The ultimate lesson is that you cannot save people who are determined to drown you. Sometimes you must cut the anchor to save yourself. True power comes from knowing when to walk away and build a table where you are actually welcome. If Jada's journey from silence to strength resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience. Have you ever had to choose between family obligation and your own dignity? I would love to hear your story in the comments below. Let's support each other.